This is the full story of Robert's rebellion, from the mad king who burned his subjects for amusement, to the beautiful maiden Lyanna Stark, snatched away by a rogue Targaryen prince. But what if I told you that this grand romantic tragedy was actually just a convenient spark? What if the war was not truly fought over a stolen bride, but was instead the inevitable explosion of a cold-blooded, generation-long political conspiracy designed to tear down the Targaryen dragons long before Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen ever crossed paths? To understand the real history of Robert's rebellion, we have to look past the romantic myth. We have to peer into the smoke of Duskendale, examine the quiet whispers of a southern alliance, and unravel the true messy motivations of the men who built the modern Seven Kingdoms on a foundation of ash and blood. This is the complete, unfiltered history of the war that changed Westeros forever. To trace the roots of the rebellion, we have to go back to the year 277 AC and a coastal town called Duskendale. Under the rule of King Aerys II Targaryen, the realm was peaceful and incredibly wealthy, largely due to the brilliant administration of his Hand of the King, Lord Tywin Lannister. But Aerys was a deeply insecure man. He grew increasingly jealous of Tywin's administrative dominance, frustrated that the lords of Westeros whispered that it was Tywin who truly ruled the realm. Seeking to assert his independence, Lord Daenys Starkland of Duskendale petitioned the crown for a new charter with tax concessions to revitalize his declining port. Tywin flatly rejected the proposal. Sensing a rift between the king and his hand, Lord Darkland invited the king to Duskendale to negotiate in person, subtly suggesting Aerys could resolve the matter without Tywin's shadow hanging over him. Against Tywin's explicit counsel, Aerys traveled to Duskendale with only a minor escort of 10 guards. It was a catastrophic trap. Upon his arrival, the king's escort was massacred, and Aerys was taken hostage and thrown into the dungeons of the Dun Fort. For 6 agonizing months, the king of Westeros sat in a dark cell while Tywin Lannister brought a massive army to besiege the town. Tywin was merciless. He made it clear that if Darkland executed the king, the crown prince Rhaegar would simply take the throne and destroy the town anyway. The crisis was finally resolved not by Tywin's armies, but by a daring, near-impossible rescue mission. Sir Barristan Selmy of the King's Guard slipped into the Dun Fort under the cover of darkness, scaled the walls, and successfully smuggled the king to safety. The vengeance that followed was absolute. House Darkland and their allies, House Hollard, were systematically exterminated. Only the young Dantos Hollard was spared, and only because Sir Barristan personally begged the king for mercy. As for Lord Daenys' Myrish wife Serala, whom the small folk called the Lace Serpent and blamed for the rebellion, her punishment was especially horrific. Aerys ordered her tongue and female parts to be torn out before she was burned alive. But the true casualty of Duskendale was Aerys' sanity. The king returned to King's Landing a broken, psychotic man. He developed a profound fear of blades, refusing to let anyone cut his hair or trim his fingernails, which eventually lengthened into grotesque yellow claws. He became utterly paranoid of his own son, Prince Rhaegar, believing the young prince had conspired with Tywin to let him die at Duskendale so Rhaegar could claim the Iron Throne. To watch for traitors, Aerys summoned a foreign Myrish eunuch named Varys to serve as his master of whisperers, institutionalizing a regime of paranoia and surveillance at court. Furthermore, when Tywin proposed a marriage between his daughter Cersei Lannister and Prince Rhaegar, Aerys insultingly rejected the offer, choosing instead to marry Rhaegar to Princess Elia Martell of Dorne. Deeply insulted and realizing the king was beyond saving, Tywin Lannister resigned his hand, leaving the crown politically isolated and highly unstable. While the king retreated to the dark corners of the Red Keep, several of the great houses of Westeros began constructing an unprecedented network of alliances. Historically, the lords of Westeros married almost exclusively within their own kingdoms to maintain local vassal loyalty. A Stark married a Karstark, a Tully married a Bracken. But during the War of the Ninepenny Kings in 260 AC, a group of young lords, including Jon Arryn of the Vale, Hoster Tully of the Riverlands, Rickard Stark of the North, Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands, and Tywin Lannister, fought side by side. They forged deep personal bonds and realized that the absolute power of the Targaryen monarchy was a danger to them all. This realization birthed what historians and fans refer to as the Southron ambitions. Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell, guided by his southern-educated maester, Waelys, sought to bring the isolated north into the wider politics of the Seven Kingdoms. The strategy was simple but revolutionary. Link the great kingdoms together through marriage to create a unified political power block capable of checking the crown. First, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon were sent to be fostered as wards of Lord Jon Arryn at the Eyrie, building a lifelong brotherly bond. Next came the strategic marriages. Rickard Stark betrothed his eldest son and heir, Brandon, to Catelyn Tully, the eldest daughter of Lord Hoster of Riverrun. At the same time, Rickard betrothed his daughter, Lyanna, to Lord Robert Baratheon of Storm's End. This horizontal alliance network created a massive continuous geographical corridor of allied territory stretching across the entire heart of Westeros. It was a brilliant, quiet coup. The Lords Paramount were effectively building a constitutional wall around the Iron Throne, preparing to demand more power for the nobility, and potentially even planning to depose Aerys in favor of a great council. The peace shattered in the year 281 AC, a brief, beautiful season known as the Year of the False Spring. A grand tournament was announced by Lord Walter Went at the massive castle of Harrenhal. It was the most lavish tourney in living memory, drawing nobility from every corner of the realm. But this was no ordinary celebration. Rumors whispered that Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was secretly funding the tourney himself, using the gathering of lords as a cover to build support for a great council that would peacefully remove his increasingly unstable father from the throne. Driven by Varys' whisperings of a coup, King Aerys II made a surprise appearance, leaving the Red Keep for the first time since Duskendale. The lords were horrified by the sight of their king, shaking, filthy, and muttering to himself in the royal pavilion. The tournament itself was spectacular though, but it concluded with an act of monumental political folly. Prince Rhaegar won the final tilt, defeating the legendary Sir Barristan Selmy. As the victor, it was Rhaegar's duty to crown the Queen of Love and Beauty. The assembly expected him to present the crown of blue winter roses to his wife, Princess Elia Martell, who sat bedridden and frail in the stands. Instead, Rhaegar rode past his wife, bypassed the high nobility of the south, and placed the crown of blue roses directly in the lap of Lyanna Stark. The gesture stunned the assembly. It was a massive public insult to Elia Martell, a direct challenge to Lyanna's betrothed, Robert Baratheon, and a slap in the face to her fiery older brother, Brandon Stark. At the coming of the new year in 282 AC, the winter returned with a vengeance, and Prince Rhaegar disappeared from the capital. Assisted by his closest friends, Sir Arthur Dayne and Sir Oswell Went of the Kingsguard, Rhaegar intercepted Lyanna Stark near Harrenhal and vanished with her to the south. Whether this was a violent kidnapping or a consensual elopement fueled by mutual love remains one of the greatest secrets of the lore, but politically, the nuance was irrelevant. The Crown Prince of Westeros had absconded with the daughter of the Warden of the North and the betrothed of the Lord of Storm's End. Rhaegar had handed the conspirators of the Southron ambitions the ultimate justification for war. News of the disappearance reached Lyanna's older brother, Brandon Stark, as he was traveling to Riverrun to marry Catelyn Tully. Hot-blooded and furious, Brandon abandoned his wedding party and rode straight for King's Landing with a small company of companion nobles, including Jon Arryn's nephew and heir, Elbert Arryn. Arriving at the gates of the Red Keep, Brandon shouted for Prince Rhaegar to come out and die. Rhaegar was not there, but King Aerys was. The Mad King immediately arrested Brandon and his companions for plotting the murder of the Crown Prince. Aerys then summoned the fathers of the accused to court to answer for their son's treason. Lord Rickard Stark rode south with a substantial retinue of 200 men, expecting a formal feudal trial. Instead, they were immediately imprisoned upon arrival. When Lord Rickard demanded his ancient right to a trial by combat, Aerys agreed, but the Mad King did not choose a knight of the Kingsguard to represent him. He chose Wildfire, declaring that the champion of House Targaryen was fire itself. In the throne room, Lord Rickard was suspended from the rafters in his steel armor over a blazing fire of wildfire. Beneath him, Brandon Stark was secured in a Tyroshi strangling device, with a longsword placed just out of reach. Brandon choked himself to death in a desperate, agonizing attempt to reach the sword and save his father, while Lord Rickard cooked alive inside his own armor. Aerys believed this horrific act of terror would crush the regional alliances. Instead, he completely destroyed the feudal contract that bound the great houses to the Iron Throne. The king then sent a raven to Jon Arryn in the Vale, demanding the immediate execution and the heads of his former wards, Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. Jon Arryn had already lost his heir, Elbert, in the Red Keep. He looked at the king's command and chose honor over obedience. Refusing to execute the young men he had raised as sons, Jon Arryn raised his banners in open revolt. The war had officially begun. The rebellion began in a state of geographical chaos. The rebel leaders were scattered across the realm, separated from their main hosts, and many of their own vassals remained loyal to the Iron Throne. The first clash occurred in the Vale. House Grafton of Goldtown remained loyal to the king, and Lord Mark Grafton called upon other loyalists to help bar the rebels from entering the port of Goldtown. Jon Arryn and Robert Baratheon marched on the city. Leading the vanguard, Robert was the first to scale the walls, personally slaying Mark Grafton and securing the vital harbor. With the port secured, the rebel leaders split up to raise their banners. Ned Stark undertook a perilous journey north, traveling through the Mountains of the Moon, sailing through the Fingers, and surviving a storm that washed him ashore on the Sisters before he reached White Harbor and Winterfell to mobilize the northern host. Meanwhile, Robert sailed south to Storm's End. He immediately faced internal rebellion from his own vassals. Loyalist stormlords Grandison, Catherine, and Fell conspired to mass their separate armies at the ruins of Summerhall and march on Storm's End. Robert executed a brilliant, rapid forced march, arriving at Summerhall before the Loyalists could combine their forces. In 3 successive battles fought on a single day, Robert defeated each army as it arrived. He slew Lord Fell in single combat, captured his son Silveraxe, and took Lords Catherine and Grandison prisoner. Robert then brought his captives back to Storm's End, feasted them, and converted them to his cause, transforming bitter enemies into his most loyal commanders. Hoping to maintain his momentum, Robert marched west toward the Reach. He encountered the vanguard of the massive Tyrell host at the border town of Ashford. The Royalist vanguard, commanded by the formidable Lord Randall Tarley, struck before the main force of Lord Mace Tyrell could arrive. Tarley's forces shattered the Baratheon army and was cut down. Robert was forced to retreat north toward the Riverlands, leaving the Stormlands completely exposed. Mace Tyrell took credit for the victory and marched his massive army to Storm's End, investing the castle in a grueling land and sea blockade that would last for the remainder of the war. Inside the castle, Robert's younger brother Stannis Baratheon held the line, refusing to yield even as his men were reduced to eating rats, glue, and leather to survive. While Stannis starved at Storm's End, Robert fled into the Riverlands, desperate to link up with the Northern and Vale hosts. The Riverlands were deeply divided. While Lord Hoster Tully committed to the rebel cause, several of his key vassals, including House Goodbrook and House Derry, remained fiercely loyal to the king. Lord Tully was forced to wage a brutal internal war, burning and sacking a village sworn to House Goodbrook to suppress the loyalists within his own borders. In early 283 AC, the newly appointed Hand of the King, Lord John Connington, moved a highly disciplined royalist army into the Riverlands to trap Robert before he could unite with his allies. Wounded and accompanied by only a few remaining defenders, Robert sought refuge in the large walled market town of Stony Sept. Connington quickly occupied the town, sealed the gates, and initiated a systematic house-by-house search. Desiring the personal glory of slaying Robert in single combat and refusing to be labeled a butcher, Connington refused to set fire to the town, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The small folk of Stony Sept actively resisted the search. They moved the wounded rebel leader between secret bolt holes, ultimately hiding him in the town's largest brothel, the Peach. The search dragged on until the combined rebel armies of Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn, alongside the Riverlords, stormed the town walls. The urban combat that followed, known as the Battle of the Bells, raged through the streets, alleys, and rooftops of Stony Sept. The town septons rang the bells to warn the small folk to lock their doors, and hearing the bells, Robert Baratheon emerged from his hiding place with a blade in hand. Robert slew 6 men, including Prince Rhaegar's close friend and former squire, Sir Miles Mouton, and engaged Connington in a desperate struggle on the steps of the town sept. Realizing the battle was lost, Connington executed a disciplined retreat, saving the remnants of his host. The political fallout of Stony Sept was massive. Aerys II stripped Connington of his lands, titles, and handship, exiling him to Essos. To secure Hoster Tully's full military commitment, a historic double wedding was celebrated at Riverrun. The widowed 60-year-old Jon Arryn married the young Lysa Tully, while Eddard Stark took the place of his deceased brother Brandon, marrying Catelyn Tully. And just 2 weeks after the ceremony, both husbands rode south to war, leaving their newly wedded wives pregnant in Riverrun. By mid-283 AC, the war had reached its final decisive stage. Prince Rhaegar, having returned from his self-imposed isolation in Dorne, took command of the royalist forces in the capital. Aerys II coerced the Martells of Dorne into sending 10,000 spearmen under the command of Prince Lewin Martell, Rhaegar's uncle-in-law, by keeping Elia and her young children as hostages in the Red Keep. This brought the royalist host to a formidable strength of 40,000 men. They marched north along the King's Road to intercept the rebel army, which was moving south with a force of approximately 35,000 battle-tested veterans. The two armies clashed at a critical crossing on the Green Fork of the River Trident, a site forever known as the Ruby Ford. The engagement was massive and chaotic, fought in the swirling waters and deep mud of the riverbed. The battle reached its historic climax when Robert Baratheon met Prince Rhaegar in single combat in the midst of the river. Despite being wounded by Rhaegar's sword, Robert swung his massive warhammer with legendary strength, delivering a crushing blow directly to the prince's breastplate. The impact shattered the three-headed dragon made of rubies on Rhaegar's armor, sending the precious gems scattering into the rushing waters as the prince collapsed dead into the stream. With their prince dead, the royalist host broke and fled. The battle claimed other high-profile casualties, including Prince Lewin Martell and Sir Jonathan Darry of the Kingsguard, while Sir Barristan Selmy was severely wounded and captured. Robert, too injured to pursue the survivors, yielded command of the rebel vanguard to Eddard Stark, ordering him to ride south and secure King's Landing. While Eddard Stark's vanguard was still on the march, Lord Tywin Lannister arrived at the gates of the Red Keep with an army of 12,000 fresh Westerland soldiers. Aerys II, desperate for reinforcement, received conflicting counsel. Varys urged the king to keep the gates closed, recognizing Tywin as a threat. However, Grand Maester Pycelle, a staunch Lannister supporter, convinced the paranoid king that Tywin had returned as his champion. Aerys ordered the gates opened. It was a fatal mistake. Once inside, Tywin ordered his army to sack the city, demonstrating his loyalty to the new regime through a brutal display of force. Lannister soldiers put the population to the sword, committing widespread massacres and pillaging. Deep within the Red Keep, Aerys II realized he had been betrayed. His madness reached its ultimate destructive conclusion. Having spent months secretly burying massive caches of highly volatile wildfire beneath the hovels, septs, and palaces of King's Landing, Aerys summoned his hand, the pyromancer Rossart. He commanded Rossart to ignite the caches, famously declaring his intent to leave Robert nothing but ashes. He then turned to Sir Jaime Lannister, the sole Kingsguard present in the city, and ordered him to bring him his father's head. Faced with the imminent destruction of the city and the murder of his father, the 17-year-old Jaime broke his sacred vows. He intercepted Rossart near a postern gate and slew him. He then returned to the throne room, cornered Aerys, and slit the throat of the Mad King at the foot of the Iron Throne. While Jaime successfully aborted the wildfire plot, he didn't stop the atrocities occurring elsewhere in the castle. On Tywin's orders, Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Armay Lorch scaled Maegor's Holdfast to eliminate the remaining Targaryen heirs. Lorch dragged the young Princess Rhaenys from beneath her father's bed and stabbed her dozens of times. Gregor Clegane brutally murdered the infant Prince Aegon by dashing his head against a wall before ravaging and murdering Princess Elia Martell while still slick with her son's blood. Eddard Stark arrived shortly after the sack, discovering Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne with the corpse of the Mad King on the floor. When Robert Baratheon arrived to claim the crown, Tywin Lannister presented him with the bodies of Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon wrapped in Lannister red cloaks. Ned Stark was horrified by the brutal murders and demanded that Tywin and his captains be punished for war crimes. Robert, blinded by his hatred for the Targaryens and recognizing that his hold on the throne was strengthened by the children's deaths, dismissed the murders as war, famously referring to the infants as dragon spawn. Disgusted by Robert's pragmatism and Jaime's treason, Ned rode south in a cold rage to finish the war alone. Ned Stark's journey south began with the peaceful lifting of the Siege of Storm's End. The massive Tyrell host, having spent the war feasting in sight of the starving garrison, immediately bent the knee to Ned Stark, raising the siege without further bloodshed. From Storm's End, Ned rode into the Red Mountains of Dorne to locate his sister, Lyanna, accompanied by 6 trusted northern companions: Howland Reed, Lord Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Bull, and Sir Mark Ricewell. They found her at a remote fortification Rhaegar had named the Tower of Joy, guarded by the 3 remaining loyalist Kingsguard: Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, Sir Arthur Dane, and Sir Oswell Went. Despite the deaths of Aerys and Rhaegar, the Kingsguard refused to stand aside. A brutal skirmish followed. The 7 Northmen fought the 3 elite knights, and only 2 survived: Eddard Stark and the Crannogman Howland Reed. Ned rushed into the tower, where he found Lyanna dying in a bed of blood and roses. Before she succumbed to childbirth fever, she extracted a solemn promise from her brother to protect her newborn son, Jon Snow, whose true father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Ned then returned to Winterfell, carrying his sister's body and the infant whom he claimed as his bastard son to protect him from Robert's wrath. The shared grief over Lyanna's death ultimately reconciled Ned and Robert, cementing a fragile peace between the new king and his most trusted friend. While the main continent fell to the rebels, the island stronghold of Dragonstone remained the final refuge of House Targaryen. Queen Rhaella and Prince Viserys had been sent there for safety before the sack of the capital. During a ferocious summer storm that destroyed the remaining Targaryen fleet anchored in the harbor, Queen Rhaella died giving birth to Princess Daenerys Targaryen. With Stannis Baratheon assembling a fleet to assault the island, the Dragonstone garrison prepared to sell the remaining children to King Robert to secure their own pardons. Before they could execute this betrayal, though, the loyal master-at-arms, Sir Willem Darry, smuggled Viserys and the infant Daenerys across the narrow sea to Braavos. In Braavos, Darry signed a secret pact of alliance with Prince Oberyn Martell, acting on behalf of Prince Doran of Dorne. This pact promised a future Martell Targaryen restoration, establishing a covert network of resistance that would sit dormant for decades. To secure his throne, King Robert agreed to a political marriage with Cersei Lannister, brokered by his new hand Jon Arryn. This union consolidated the financial backing of House Lannister, but ultimately embedded a toxic dynamic at the heart of the new regime. Robert's rebellion didn't resolve the systemic instability of the Iron Throne. It merely replaced a dynasty of mad dragon lords with a fragile coalition of houses, leaving the realm vulnerable to the next great crisis. From tax issues in Duskendale to the Battle of the Trident, to Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen's flight to Essos, Robert's rebellion is truly one of the most impactful events throughout the entire history of Westeros. Its impact directly leads into all the events of Game of Thrones, and without it, the fiery House of the Dragon likely never would have fallen. And that's all for today. What are your thoughts? Was Rhaegar and Lyanna's love real, or was she actually kidnapped by the Targaryen prince? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.